Rub hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rent. Right now it's time for hemp.
Thank you for taking time for hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leitch. You are listening to Time for Hemp all around the world on Tumblr, SoundCloud, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and anywhere sound is found. Please make it a point to share us with your friends. We are going to have a fantastic chat today with a friend of ours at Leap and a joint host from Leap. And we're going to have Judge Lenny Frieling as our joint host. Good morning, Your Honor.
Casper, always a pleasure. How are you?
Fantastic, thank you. And I'll let you introduce our guest.
I am honored and pleased to introduce Kyle Kazan, Officer Kazan. What was your correct title before your law enforcement retirement?
So, Judge, I was a police officer working both gangs at different points, and I was a drug recognition evaluator. So I was in patrol, assisting on all kinds of different calls, but I would say squarely in the middle of the drug war.
So you were on the street in the thick of it.
Correct. Absolutely.
I mean, because of the tragedies we have been dealing with over the last several weeks, the reason our flag at home is at half-mast leads me to wanting to start with the more difficult, painful part of this. Do you think it is fair to attribute any connection between the relationship of law enforcement and civilians and what we're seeing on the streets now that is so upsetting? And the drugs. Absolutely. I don't know if you saw Neil Franklin's comments, Neil Franklin being the head of LEAP right now, and he basically says you can't have a war on drugs. You have a war on people. And so, whenever you're arresting somebody for hurting themselves, that's quite a step for the government to take. And, a lot of people don't support when their neighbors and relatives are taken to jail for their addiction issues, and in a lot of our communities, unfortunately, the young entrepreneurs move into the space to sell to those folks, and I think that you remove the war on drugs, that is a game changer in relationships within communities all across the country and the police. When you went to knock on a door, for example, investigating what we would call real crime, somebody's loose in the neighborhood that is believed to be dangerous.
Yep. Did I lose you, Judge?
I thought maybe it was just me. Yes, we. So
let me pick up until the judge comes back. We're
right.
Investigating real crimes and this happened a lot of time. We'd have a helicopter up, and we've got somebody who broke into a house, and we're not focused on the drug war. We're focused in on life safety and taking a bad person to jail. And so I think our resources were much better spent that way. Policing doing things that are more traditional, which is saving people from, bad people. Judge, did you come back?
Well, no, but it makes me wonder, how is it that you are able to, about the fallacy of the war on drugs. How were you able to work with that inside your job and inside your brain?
Casper, it's a good question. When I was a young police officer, I came in at 27, college graduate school education. I think I was a decently smart guy. But you get, the carrots as a police officer were to go out there and make arrests, take felons off the street. And it was very easy as a young officer trying to make my bones out there to just go out there and arrest folks. The low-hanging fruit is somebody with a bundle of methamphetamine in their pocket, or a bunch of weed, or something like that. And you just take them to jail, and you get different attaboys, and you're looked at amongst your peers as that's a good officer. He's out there making arrests and taking people to jail, hooking and booking. But if when you pay attention and you get to know people, and I'm a somewhat affable guy, you realize it's just a game. And all you're doing is just shuffling people around. It costs a lot of money. And unfortunately, I don't think it really does much public good. So while I was still an officer, I was realizing this is just a game.
And I think
a game in what sense of the word?
I would call it a game in the sense that I'm taking somebody to jail. A lot of times they're out before I'm even done doing the paperwork. Then they go off. They don't show up to court. Turns into a warrant. They finally get to court. They're sentenced to 3 months, a year. They go to county jail. LA County Jail is so overly impacted and was then, and they're out in 2 days. Like, what are we doing? All those resources were spent on that arrest for nothing. It was a waste of time. And then guys that are doing the bigger crimes, let's say stealing a car or breaking into houses, because our prisons and jails are so overly impacted with people, they get let out early as well. So guys that are, people that are actually victimizing other people are also benefiting from this drug war, which is a shame, because those folks, are a hazard.
What I would call real crime.
Real crime, sure. Crimes persons, crimes property, not crimes against themselves.
When you took drug dealers, drug users, regardless of the drugs, off the street,
sure. Yep.
Did taking them off the street have an impact on real crime? Did it reduce stuff that was hurting me personally?
So I would say that I'm going to give you a nuanced answer. Yes and no. Sometimes those guys out there, they're the ones committing the auto burglaries in the middle of the night on their bicycles, and I know they're doing it, but I can't prove it, but I get them with a bundle of meth. So I took them to jail, and, so yeah, at least while the time they're in the system, the game, they're not burglarizing. But by and large, no, I don't think so. I think for the most part, if you're just hurting yourself and you're not out there burglarizing cars and things like that, which I would say the majority of these users were not out there committing those crimes, it doesn't have a positive impact on your life. In fact, it taps your tax dollars and wastes them.
If I speculated that a significant portion of the burglaries were committed to get money to buy drugs, am I just being clever, or is there reality to that?
There's reality to that. There's reality to it. And you'll hear a police officer say, I have several friends that they disagree with my opinion on this matter, my approach. And they'll say, look, I didn't get my burglar burglarizing, but I got him with dope. So I got him off the street. What's the difference? And my response is, well, we're looking for burglars to take them off the street for burglary. Let's try harder. Let's not use this as a way, where we say, well, this is our proxy to take out a burglar that we think is burglarizing. But that's the common refrain amongst police officers that like the status quo.
When you took a dealer off the street, medium level, high level, took them off the street, locked them up, did their job slot remain unfilled, shrinking the number of people involved in that drug business?
Well, what I would tell you is somebody else obviously picked up the flag went down. Somebody else picked it up and kept it going, because there was plenty of dope out there for the users. And so I don't know which, when I took a dealer off the street, someone else benefited for sure.
When we look at some of the violence in inner city type situations, when we look at drive-by shootings and stuff, it has always struck me that what we're seeing is fighting over turf. What is it that gave that turf any value? What's being fought over?
So for sure, the drug industry, because remember, these folks that are selling drugs and supplying drugs to their swath of the community, they can't call the police. They can't call the city and say, hey, another liquor store has opened up in an area where I'm supposed to have the only liquor store in this little radius. They have to work it out amongst themselves, and so they typically work it out violently by shooting at each other, and they're defending their turf. And if you think about it, most of these gang members are not gainfully employed. So the money that they're fighting over, which sometimes is decently lucrative, buys their guns, buys their cars, buys their lifestyle. And so yeah, the illicit drug battles, these gang wars are typically over drug turf.
One of my pet issues, one of the things that frankly makes me as crazy as I am, is the private prison system. Do you see that fitting into this war on drugs big picture?
I don't like the private prison system. I'm a pretty, I'm a supporter of Gary Johnson. I'm libertarian, but there are certain things that I expect the government to provide without financial incentive, and one of those is prison. Prisons need to be agnostic. I also don't like the prison guards, fighting, for the drug war because they want more bodies in there because they can, keep hiring more prison guards. So I think the prisons need to, they're there at the they're there as a tool for the justice system. Period. Not there to make money on people. Not there to try and influence policy. I hope that answered the question.
It did. I refer to it as the Motel 8 model.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Thank you. And of course, as you and I know, the model is Motel 8, I want to fill every room every night, and I want to fill them to the extent that I need to build Motels 9 and 10 out the back door. With
Correct.
The state running the prison system, their incentive is just the opposite. I want to see private prisons closed, and I want to see the opportunity offered. You're a prison guard, you're a sheriff's deputy working in a prison. I don't want these people unemployed. I'd love to offer them the opportunity to guard the marijuana grow that should be inside the prison, with the guards learning how to grow and guard. Flip it on its head.
So, Judge, I think that's certainly a pragmatic approach where you want to make sure everybody has a beneficial seat at the table. And so the prison guards, I think, feel like they're under threat. And so that's why I think right now at Proposition 64 in California, I think the prison guards have given some money to the opposition, which I just don't think, I think that's almost as unhealthy as private prisons, where, we don't need to be lobbying to just lock people up just for, gainful employment. It worries me. So I like your motel analogy.
I like it because it's accurate, because it's amusing, and it's also simply horrifying. In my mind, it is the most extreme example of a conflict of interest that I've come up with yet. You're
absolutely right. And for the average listener out there who says, look, I go to work, use a little bit of weed on the weekends, this doesn't affect me. I'm not going to jail. Well, when there's people that want bodies in beds so they get paid, should be considered a threat to all of us, because it could be your body, because they don't really care. You're just it's just you're part of the pennies they're looking for. So I think that's something that all of us as citizens should take very seriously.
One of the things that we see is, and we've talked about this a lot, the disparate application of drug laws to people of darker skin colors than I am. I happen to be Caucasian. Were you seeing any of the racial issues that overlay in what you were seeing with this war on people, drugs?
You know, I wasn't, and I'll tell you why. I patrolled an area, the city of Torrance, which is the 6th largest city in Los Angeles County. I would say the vast majority of my arrestees were Caucasian, like myself, just because that was our population. Meth was a drug of choice. It fit. So, you know, I do know when I'm a citizen also, and I have a lot of law enforcement friends all over the country, that when you do look at the prison populations and the demographic numbers, it's disturbing. And so, and it's not helping the communities that, you know, when I live here in Los Angeles, when I'm driving up the 110 freeway and on either side of me is South Central, and I say, God, I wouldn't want to get off the freeway here. I think dumping more and more resources into hooking people up and taking them to jail, as opposed to treating it like a health situation, a health crisis, and then taking some of those same dollars and putting them into job training, schools, things like that. I think that's a better way to improve those neighborhoods than to just bring in a force.
When we are seeing forced, compelled drug treatment, the illusion, I would say, that we are treating the health issue because a court orders it. Any difference between court-ordered treatment and the person who themselves say, boy, you know, this meth is really not making my life better. I think I better take a look at that, reevaluate it, maybe get treatment. Isn't treatment treatment?
Boy, this is going to come down to, you know, personal experience, I think, and Judge, I think I would defer to you, but I can share some personal anecdotes, and that is I have some family members that have been, that are addicted to different drugs, and so I've gone through Betty Ford as a family participant, and they hammer in that until that person is really ready themselves, there's no real, the chances are not likely that they will stay off the drugs for any period of time. So, but that said, I have a very good friend from high school, college, intermediate school, and he became addicted to methamphetamine, and he credits the court, a judge like yourself, basically having a lecture with him saying, this is your last chance. You either go to the Beacon House or you're on your way to do hard time, and the choice is yours. And it was that he got scared straight, and he decided to work his program and make it work. So that took him to rock bottom. So I think it's important for the person to be ready, and what caused that person to be ready, I think it depends. So I guess let me throw that same question that you asked me to you, because I'm curious as to your thought.
I think I do us a disservice when I try to paint it black and white like that. As a full-time criminal defense attorney, I have seen people change their attitude about their drug use and benefit from treatment that was court-ordered, but I have to say, I really think that was rare. And what we're seeing in Colorado now, which points out the utter ridiculous nature of the system, is taking somebody that is busted for, say marijuana, which of course we're seeing less of in Colorado. You arrest them for marijuana, you send them through the court system, you send them through treatment, and the only treatment that's out there is alcohol treatment. Certainly, I think it's fair to say there's some overlap. Drug abuse is drug abuse. But again, that black and white approach, it just intuitively makes no sense. And from what I saw and still see, it makes no sense. When I have to sit somebody in my office and say, you were busted for this drug, so now you're going to be compelled to do a year of alcohol treatment. not substance necessarily, not pot, alcohol treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make as little sense? Is that as nuts as I think it is?
I think so. I'm as a fellow LEAP member, I'm in favor of legalizing and regulating all drugs and making the option for treatment, paid for through the taxes that are collected. I know a lot of people are going to be shocked by that, and I have friends that say, "Are you crazy? You're talking about heroin," and I'm just saying, no, I'm not crazy. I'm pragmatic, and I've been on the streets and I've seen enough where I think if the option is there, people they'll utilize it when they're ready, and when they're ready and they utilize it at that time, they have a much higher chance of staying clean. That's my kind of my worldview there.
In your law enforcement work, were meth labs a part of that picture, or was that different?
Sure. No, they were there. No, meth labs were there.
This is a softball, but I think it's important.
Mm-hmm.
If let's say LEAP succeeds,
yeah.
If you had a choice, knowing meth was going to be manufactured, knowing that if we outlaw one method, some of the meth addicts are really quite brilliant chemists. They come up with a new method of making it. You make Sudafed illegal, they come up with a new method. Who do we want manufacturing it? Merck Chemical, Pfizer Chemical, or the guy down the street that flunked out of high school chemistry?
Well, I'm going to make this easy. I'm just going to put it out there to all the listeners. Next time you have to go in for a minor surgery and your anesthesiologist poses the question, look, we need to put you under. Do you want to go with a highly regulated company, highly regulated by the FDA? Or would you rather have it from, JoJo Knucklehead, who made it in his bathtub, and hopefully he got it right? So, when the state, the United States does something very, very well, and that's regulation. Sometimes they overregulate, but a lot of times they get it well. And when it comes to alcohol, I think they do a good job as far as keeping it out of the hands of minors, things like that, and also making sure it's quote unquote safe, where you're not just dying because you're drinking poison. And so I hope that happens with the rest of these drugs. And again, I'm not out here, and I know you aren't as well. I'm not preaching I want someone to go out and use heroin. I don't think they should use it whether it's legal or illegal. But I think if someone is going to use it, I'd like it to be safe. I'd like it to be manufactured by a reputable company that's regulated by the United States government.
I know in Colorado, when I go into a medical marijuana regulated, licensed, supervised, videotaped, security guarded outlet to buy medical marijuana, and I go into the one up the street where they know me on a first name basis. Hi, Lenny, how are you? They still make me show proof of age every single time. And in fact, 2 different times I've walked in and they said, Lenny, you let your driver's license expire. Okay. Okay. Glad you told me. And not
sloppy, Judge. Sloppy.
Oh, I know. And once it was expired by about a year. And it was the marijuana guys who were the ones that spotted it. And guess what?
I love it.
It wouldn't. I know. I'm current now. Then they caught me twice. And guess what? They would not sell me a joint. Now, they were nice about it, and they said, go home and get your passport. In your years on the street, how many drug dealers, whether it was pot, heroin, whatever, how many did you run into that were checking proof of age before they would sell a baggie of heroin, a balloon to someone?
That is a question I've been doing interviews for many years now. That's a first. So that question. Yeah, I never saw a responsible drug dealer. Let me share a quick anecdote. From 1920 to 1933, alcohol was prohibited like marijuana has been prohibited for so long. And so it was looked at as a dangerous drug. Today, most people don't see it as a dangerous drug. They just realize, hey, if I want to go buy a beer or I want to go buy vodka, I can go down to the liquor store. So the 7-Eleven, there was one in Torrance. We used to go there on Thanksgiving and Christmas. The owners, it was a husband and wife team. They would make us ham or turkey, and just, to us, yes, they're selling a drug. Can be a dangerous drug, but they're doing it in a responsible fashion. We looked at that as just, a kind business taking care of us, but also they're Rotarians, they're taxpayers, they're employing people, and that's what I'm hoping we put out of business the person you just kind of referenced that doesn't do any of those, doesn't pay taxes, doesn't card your kids, doesn't card the judge, for responsible citizens that pay taxes and take this seriously.
I realize that this may be the same in every single state. In Colorado, if a liquor store has reason to believe that somebody is an alcoholic, do you know they're not allowed to sell them alcohol?
I did not know that. I know that there are laws here in California where, and I'm sure they're the same in most states, that if a bartender thinks somebody is over the point of, they're too inebriated to really care for themselves or they're heading that way, they're supposed to cut them off. And there are some liabilities for that bartender and for the bar if they do not. So I think that's a tough one to recognize an alcoholic, but interesting.
In a bar, in fact, they can lose their license.
Absolutely.
For serving an intoxicated person, for serving an underage person.
We put out of business, well, to your point, there was a bar named Don Jose's in Torrance when I was a police officer in the 90s. And we just kept having bar fights because they didn't have enough security, they didn't keep control. And because it's a regulated business, we basically termed it a rowdy house and got the alcohol beverage control. And we put them out of business. And
what a fine example of regulation at work in a way that most of our civilians, you and I, would say, that's a really good thing.
Absolutely. The citizens of Torrance were not sad to see Don Jose's go.
Makes sense. I know that every single liquor establishment I've been to, whether it's a club, a store, retail, has a sign. All disturbances must be reported to the police. Anything similar in California?
I don't know. I don't know if we have that similar law. I don't believe so, but I will tell you, if you have a liquor license, you are subject to the police coming in any time you're open, monitoring you and stepping behind the bar, doing an audit, highly regulated. And also some of that tax money goes to doing stings where they will get a kid who's 18 years old and they'll send him in to a dozen liquor stores in a geographic area and see if they can get them to sell, get that person to sell to underage minors. So there's a lot going on to regulate alcohol, and I would imagine, I believe Prop 64 will pass here in California, and we'll have a similar law that you have there in Colorado. And just like you have a medical enforcement division, we will have something very similar, and we'll probably be even harder regulations on marijuana than alcohol, which is good.
Well, the United States has been properly described as the great experiment. California gets to look at Colorado and pick and choose. Here's what we like. Here's what we can do better. Isn't that our system at work?
It is. It is, and I'm like you. I was a public servant. I'm consider myself very patriotic, and it's one of the things I love about the United States. If you travel around the country, you get the different flavors and some different laws, and so I think it's great. I traveled 4 times the year after the law passed in Colorado. I came to Denver and wanted to see how it was being implemented, wanted to just see attitudes, and because I knew it was coming to California, and so quite entertaining to watch the paradigm shift, and I'm looking forward to seeing that same thing happen here.
When I walk into a legal marijuana outlet, I still burst out laughing because I'm 65 years old. I've been around. I don't know how old you are, but we've been around. We've seen it go through this change. And when I walk in and see rows of legal bottles of very pretty marijuana, it just makes me laugh. It warms my heart. Mm-hmm. Let's be clear about stings. I know in Colorado, I used to, before I learned better, I used to think they would send somebody in that looked 30 years old and have them say, "Oh, I'm 30 years old." And then I learned that what they really do is absolutely be 100% honest, show their honest-to-God ID, showing they're honest-to-God 19 years old. Mm-hmm. And the liquor stores, the bars that got stung were the ones that didn't look, not at a fake ID that they didn't spot, but at a real ID that showed the person underage. They were legitimate stings.
Well, whether it's attention to detail or greed, if you have a license, you've been awarded either a marijuana license or you've been awarded a liquor license. You have to take it seriously, and there are certain responsibilities that come with it, and you risk losing it if, for any reason, you're not following it. And so, as a law and order guy, I fully support that with your the benefit of having that license comes great responsibility. So it's wise to take it seriously.
And I don't believe that any thinking person could look you in the eye and say, alcohol is not dangerous.
Right.
We know it's dangerous. And I am not saying, marijuana is less dangerous or more dangerous. Different discussion, but that's not the point, is it?
No, it's not. And the statistics will show it. There's more alcohol, there's more deaths from alcohol than any other drug. In fact, probably all of the drugs combined. So, it must be taken seriously and does cause great damage to society. But I think prohibition causes more damage. It's kind of the lesser of two evils. And so I would go with legalization and regulation all day long, every day.
I used to think that all of that, the leap position, all made sense to me, and that big picture, drugs, if they were legal, it wasn't anything inherent in dangerous drugs that made people do dangerous things, but for the need for the money to get something they were addicted to. And I used to think, well, what do we do about PCP, a drug which, as far as we know, honest to God, I need a new expression, a drug that we would generally agree may very well cause people to behave really badly in very dangerous ways. How much PCP do we see out there now?
Well, I've been off the streets for 17 years. It wasn't something we were seeing every day, but I did see it once in a while. And that's a discussion that's worthy of having to say, how much, is this drug so dangerous for people that, if they choose to take it, how do we handle that? Can we put them in a relatively safe environment where they have to pay up a bit to make sure they're strictly monitored for the experience? I'm trying to find a way of saying, I don't really want it. I don't want it illegal, because the current situation with that, they don't know what they're getting, so it could cause more damage than if it was regulated. And also, those who want to use it are, they're dipping their cigarettes in it, and it's called Cools, and they, then they're out and about, and there is no even attempt at a safety measure. So that's a tough one, Judge. That's a tough one.
Here. Let me tell you what I've been seeing. Let me share with you what I've been seeing over the last 10, 20 years, 17 years, for example. I have not seen PCP come up in a case in 10 or 20 years. It seems to have self-extinguished. Now, has heroin self-extinguished? No. But who dies from heroin? You go on the street, and I'll have a client come into the office. They'll say, I was busted with ecstasy. I was busted with heroin. I explained to them, no, you weren't. You were busted with an unknown, mysterious white powder that you have no idea what you were really taking. You have no idea what the strength was. And your heroin that may have been 10% yesterday, maybe it's 40% today, and oops, I'm sorry, you're dead.
Right.
Using underground heroin carries a random death penalty. Do we really think it is that inherently evil that a random death penalty is okay? I don't think
Well,
so.
Judge, I've sat with, I remember the story brings back a memory of getting a call late one night, early graveyard, like about 1 a.m., from a teenage girl, 16, 17 years old, who had just gotten back from the movies. Her mom had been fighting her heroin addiction, and she put her needle in her arm, and it was a hot load. Like you said, hot load meaning the percentage of heroin was much higher than she anticipated, and it stopped her heart. No one was there to give her Narcan, and so by the time the daughter got home, she was slumped like a U with her head on the ground and her feet on the ground over a chair. And I remember sitting with this young lady going, well, if there was a smarter way, her mother would still be with her. And now this young 16, 17-year-old girl is going to live the rest of her life without her mom. And that shows she didn't deserve the death penalty, absolutely not. And just an absolute shame. And the woman, by the way, was employed and was doing her best to just kind of maintain her life. She didn't want to get sick. So if she'd had a legal outlet, I think she'd have been, you probably wouldn't even known that she was on heroin, for number one. And number two, most importantly, she'd be alive.
One of the things that I was exposed to that was presented as very possibly true, I suspect it is that if two different people are addicted to heroin, one is rich and one is poor, a rich heroin addict doesn't have a problem in life. They'll live a perfectly normal life, and their friends likely won't even know they're heroin users or heroin addicts. You take that same heroin addict and make them poor, then we have a problem that's visible to all of us. Well, is it the drug that's inherently causing this? No. Please, go.
Judge, I still would respectfully disagree with you a bit there. Yes, please. I agree that if you're affluent and you're driving your BMW, it's less likely that they're going to try and toss your car or basically try and get in and search your car, versus if you're poor, you just look more like a drug addict, at least the stereotype. But that wealthy person is still buying heroin they're not buying it from Merck. They're buying it from cooks, and while their dealer might look more presentable in society, the underlying drug is still, you're risking the death penalty, rich or poor.
So even if the drugs were identical, that's just not our reality.
It's not our reality.
When I say identical, I mean identical to the doctor prescribing them.
I would say if and I don't mean to get away from your point. I was kind of probably belaboring your last point, where it was, because it's illegal, everybody that puts a needle in their arm or chase the dragon's tail or however they ingest it, is risking their life. They're risking the death penalty. But certainly affluence, affluence plays a part in your ability to hide from law enforcement, and also to hire good lawyers like yourself, and when you do get caught up in it, versus a public defender who has 30 cases a day.
Well said. I like that good lawyer part. That was very well said. Even joking aside, that's what I see. Narcan.
Yep.
You mentioned Narcan, which is now becoming available to first responder. It's becoming easily available to the families of a heroin addict. For our listeners that haven't run into it yet, what is Narcan? Why does that matter? What is it?
So it's I would call it, I've seen it in action, it's a miracle drug. It basically, when somebody is on a CNS depressant like heroin, and they are, actually it's like an opiate, when they're out, they're dying. They look comatose. The first responder, back when I was there, was a paramedic, immediately put a shot into their chest to just get it in there, and it reverses immediately the effects of heroin, and typically the person just throws up, just vomits, and comes to life as if they were not. I mean, it takes away the high, it brings them back to life. Without it, typically that person will overdose and be gone. So getting it in the hands of first responders and training them, be it police officers, ambulance drivers, firefighters besides paramedics, it's, that will save lives. If they did that in all 50 states, lives would be saved every year.
What occurs to me, happily a situation I personally have not experienced and you have, but here's what occurs to me. Not only does Narcan allow the first responders, whether it's the paramedic, the family, the officer on the scene, not only does it put them in the position of saving a life rather than watching someone die, helping the person whose life they've saved, I'm thinking about the change in the emotional impact on the law enforcement personnel. How hard is it to watch someone die as opposed to saving their life?
It sucks. It sucks to watch somebody die. I've gotten to do that, or I've had to do that. So the police officers that I was lucky enough to work with, these are good people, and they're trying to do right by society, and they're trying to make the world a better place. And anything that can be done so that give them more tools in their toolbox to do that, I think you'd find are welcomed. And I know right now it's easy with the protests, and sometimes police are painted in a bad light, but I haven't met. I was lucky enough to never meet an officer who wasn't out there for the right reasons. So yeah, anything we can do to make them better for society would be welcomed by all.
On a related but off-topic subject, I have to share this because it's a pet peeve. One of the experiences I have had is an extensive amount of pistol training from one of the top people on the planet. I don't carry concealed because I found that carrying a 3-pound pistol, it weighed 50 pounds all the time. It was never gone from my mind.
Right.
With the recent shootings, and we're talking about very small numbers of people. We had a shooting recently in Boulder, and it was a righteous police shooting. The bad guy was shooting at them. The press focused on the fact that the officers fired 62 rounds. What they didn't focus on is they only hit 11 times. Not good training. They focused on the number of rounds. And I can tell you what I was taught. You can please tell me if this is reality. What I was taught is when officers are debriefed after a shooting, almost to the officer, they will say, I fired 2 shots. I fired 3 shots, when the reality is virtually every time they have not only emptied their magazine, regardless of the size, but they're still standing there pulling the trigger on the empty magazine, click, click, and not knowing it.
Absolutely.
Any reality?
Yes, Judge, you're right on point. Where I think it's easy to armchair quarterback law enforcement, and now I'm in the position to be able to do that because I'm not out there. But if you're firing your weapon, all the shootings that I've seen, and I shouldn't say just on some of the videos, but typically, you're in fear of your life. You think you're going to die, and so you're shooting to stop that threat so that you survive. And so imagine somebody breaking into your house. I'm trying to make it more user-friendly for somebody who's driving right now and listen to the broadcast and say, imagine you get up in the middle of the night and you hear some noises, you happen to have a gun, you pick up the gun, and you see somebody there that you believe is going to try and kill you with a weapon. And you start shooting, you'll stop shooting when you think that person is neutralized, so that you're now safe. And so, and to a person, I shot at a pit bull once that was charging my partner. And I thought I had shot once, and I shot 3 times. So,
precisely
when your adrenaline's high.
We were also taught, do not try to count your shots, because not only can it not really be done, but we were taught that a common experience is that officers involved in righteous shooting, to make the question a little easier, the point a little easier, tend to not hear the gunshots of their own pistol.
What's amazing is when you're right, when you shoot in the range, you have earplugs. You have things to save your hearing. When you're out in the street, now you have nothing. And I heard more with the ear protection than I did when I was in the street, because you're so focused in. And the other thing you're focused in on is what's behind what I'm shooting at. So you have so many things to consider. One, you want to save your own life or the life of, others around you. 2, you want to make sure you're not going to kill grandma who happens to be walking behind what you're shooting at. So counting the number of shots, that's a whole lot to start putting your brain through when it's on extreme adrenaline and focus.
I know that we were taught not only don't count your shots, but learn how to reload tactically rapidly. And to tie this back into the drug war, I have to wonder how many good and bad police shootings would not happen if the drugs were legal and regulated.
I think you bring up a very good question. Anytime you're asking people to enforce a law and someone's not going along, there's a chance and some probability that there will be use of deadly force. So if you remove those laws and take the police out of the equation, then there will be 100% less shootings in the drug war than there are today. And I don't care if there was one shooting, although we know it's far more than that, one shooting across the country that you could stop, it would be mammoth. So you're right. Remove the drug war, remove all those shootings.
I'm going to share a suggestion. Tell me if I'm off base, please. My concern. I have friends in law enforcement. I have people in law enforcement that I truly love. Part of it because I know them better than others. And they're in a position these days where whether there's truth to them being targeted, and sadly we know there is truth to it, I think there may well be a law enforcement perception that they are seen as the bad guys, adding to the stress, adding to the difficulty of doing what, to begin with, is one of the hardest jobs on the planet. Here's my plan. Alternate. One morning, stop by at the local station and bring a large box of assorted donuts. And to avoid the stereotyping issue, alternate it. On the days when it's not donut day, bring in a large basket of fruit as a way of saying, I'm a civilian. Thank you for being there. It matters.
So, Judge, I like the sentiment. Let me share with you. Like most people, and at least I live here in Southern California. I know you live in the healthy state of Colorado. I would say, donuts have a twofold negative. One, they're not good for you. Two, it's a stereotype most police officers don't like. Bagels are much more user friendly. Fruits, things like that are great. And almost like Halloween, I think people, there are people out there that are trying to do harm to law enforcement. So they will look at you a little bit with a, who is this person, and want to make sure it just doesn't get thrown away. But one thing you can do if you really want to make an impact, and is if you see a couple officers dining, and I used to chuckle when people get upset. They'd see me out there having a cup of coffee or something. And I'm saying, this is my job. I'm entitled to a free moment to clear my head. And so if you see an officer clearing his head, or he's at Starbucks, or he's having or she is having something to eat, pick up their tab, buy them, pay that cup of coffee. That is sincerely appreciated. Another thing one of the neighbors down the street did, she was so affected by what happened in Dallas and Louisiana, she changed the front bulb on her front light. As I drive by her house, I noticed she put a blue light there. And also people are painting their curb with a stripe of blue, just as a way of saying, hey, this house really appreciates what you're doing. And I'm not saying anybody condones a bad shooting. Nobody, including law enforcement,
Nobody.
Do I know. But what it does say is, these are scary times out there, and we appreciate the fact that every day you're putting on your vest, putting on your badge and gun, and when I call 911, I know someone's going to come here and help me.
I'm sitting here grinning. I personally have, and I'm bragging, but I feel good about it. I personally have picked up dinner checks and vanished. I didn't need a personal thank you. I'm just a guy in the street. The Leos didn't need to know who was picking up their check, but I have picked up checks, and you're right. It had to have made the men and women in blue smile a little.
Well, I can certainly tell you here in Portland, where I live, in Oregon, where medical marijuana and recreational use is now legal, it's a big difference from where I was living in Indiana. If I needed the police in Indiana, someone's breaking into my house, causing me bodily harm, and I called the police, they would arrest the person who was the perpetrator, but would also probably arrest me because I had a pipe on the premises and maybe a half ounce there, and we'd all just go to jail. And here in Portland, if I call the police, they come up and they help me. They take away the perpetrator and leave me in my home.
I think it's a better day for all of us.
And I feel safer calling the police, and I now know they are my friend.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that said, we're down to the last couple of minutes of the program. So, let's give Kyle a couple of minutes to put a spotlight on some URLs that he wants people to know about.
Yes, please go to leap.cc, leap.cc. The judge and I are proud members, and it's former law enforcement, judges, district attorneys, and we are fighting against the drug war and basically legalization efforts around the country. So please, your donations, your participation, your time on the site are certainly appreciated to at least see our point of view.
And Your Honor?
Let's be clear about this. While the speakers from LEAP must be the former law enforcement like Kyle Kazan that we're so lucky to have with us today, former prosecutors, former prison wardens, you do not have to have any law enforcement credentials in order to join LEAP, to be a LEAP supporter, and to help us move the ball forward for the safety, for the happiness of all of us. When an officer knocks on the door, my thought is now, officer, how can I help? As opposed to, did I leave a roach in the ashtray? What a difference. One good, one bad.
And
it really can be that simple.
And speaking of good and driving with a roach in your ashtray, how about driving impaired? Is there a little birdie that might put a bug in your ear about how sober you are?
You know, it's yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
You know, I want to make sure we touch that, because in all the legalization efforts, that's one of the big red herrings that's thrown out there, is there's no test for somebody driving under the influence of marijuana, which I am adamantly opposed to. If you drive while using, you have a problem with me, because you're risking my life and my family's life. And there are police officers like myself that are trained to just take them off the road, and based on their professional certification, their opinion, they can affect the arrest. So please don't believe that red herring out there, that there's no way to handle somebody's driving impaired.
And, Your Honor, you have a way, don't you?
Our personal project, we've developed an iPhone, not Android yet, app called My Canary. Go to My Canary app, mycanaryapp.com. And what we do is take advantage of the hardware, software of the iPhone, so that somebody can look at their performance, at their reaction time, at their balance, compare it to their own baseline. So whether it's one pain pill and they're tired and they had a drink 4 hours ago and a toke off a bong 7 hours ago, the chemistry doesn't tell us anything. We want to know how their performance is. MyCanaryApp.com. We like to believe it's a game changer, as I think former Officer Kazan would agree. We're interested in the performance at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Good for you, Judge. I'm glad that we're using some technology to make life better for all.
And with that said, I want to remind people that we are a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, all cannabis, all the time broadcast, heard on iHeartRadio, Tumblr, SoundCloud, and iTunes, and we are a team of people that are growing every day. Please make it a point to let your friends know how important it is to end prohibition, and remember, the next time you hear me, you'll know that it's time for hemp.
The money that they spent. Take another look and spend some time for him. Don't cut trees for paper, 'cause it hurts the environment.